Can you believe the long and unique history of the SeaWorld theme parks? SeaWorld has been one of the most controversial and talked about theme parks in the world. They are also probably one of the biggest companies that have undergone serious changes over the years to make major improvements for their brand. In this video, we are going to go through the history and transformation of the SeaWorld brand to the result we see today. Before we dive into the history, let's talk about the current portfolio of SeaWorld parks and entertainment. The company currently has 7 theme parks, 4 water parks, and 1 oceanarium park in the United States. The parks they run are SeaWorld, Busch Gardens, Sesame Place, and Discovery Cove. We will break down each of these parks' brands and the history behind them, as well as tell the overall story of the company. The story of SeaWorld is broken down into 2 main areas. The first would be with the Busch brands, which came prior to SeaWorld, Anheuser-Busch, which had a theme park division within their company. They consider the division the fun aspect of the company, an area that was giving back and allowing people to have fun, especially for those who were employees for the company. The Busch Gardens parks were seen as a break from the daily life of people who work for the Busch brands. The theme park aspect was seen as a side piece to the business. They utilized it as a marketing vehicle with the purpose to sell the Anheuser-Busch products, as they believed the parks would be a driver to bring more attention to their products, thus creating more brand awareness. The Busch Gardens name came from gardens that were created by Adolphus Busch, which were near his homes in Pasadena, California. This Busch Gardens would be open from 1906 to 1937, which would allow the public to enjoy time out in the beautiful gardens. In the 1950s, the Busch Company began looking for a large enough area for an entertainment complex, as well as new brewing and manufacturing location. In 1954, a Busch brewery would open in Van Nuys, California. This was only a smaller area and would not have a great opportunity for large expansion. That being said, Busch took it as the first opportunity to break into the world of entertainment, pairing it with their amazing brewery tour. A park would come in 1966. The only purpose would be to support the Busch brewery. This smaller park would originally have a 10-minute monorail tour for the brewery and a boat ride. By 1972, they would expand further with a magic show, animals, and new rides. Though it had some success, they would close this location by 1979. Most of their animals would be moved to the Busch Gardens location in Tampa. The company looked for a larger area for their brewing and potential park. This would mean the first they would look at Florida as their target, which they decided between Jacksonville or Tampa. The first official Busch Gardens would begin construction in Tampa, Florida in 1957. On March 31, 1959, August Busch Jr. and his son Adolphus Busch IV would dedicate Busch Gardens. The park would technically open on this day as well, where you could have an admission-free hospitality tour of the brewery as well as see a bird show in front of the brewery. There would be a bird gardens which had birds roaming freely as well, allowing you to drink Busch-branded beers and enjoy the wildlife. The park would officially open to the public on June 1, 1959. The day would have around 1,000 visitors to Busch Gardens. This Busch Gardens looked very different from the one we know today. It had 36,000 flowering plants, 300 trees, as well as various lagoons, and the bird areas as mentioned earlier. The other thing that made this park unique was the fact that you would be able to see the Budweiser Clydesdales. Again, the perfect marketing synergy for the Busch brands. In July 1959, the Busch Company would announce a $5 million expansion as the area became such a surprising success. Throughout the 1960s, Busch would have additions to their park. First that would be built would be a geodesic dome in the gardens featuring bird nests and unique plants. The next big expansion would be their Stairway to the Stars, which would lead to a brewery tour and would have a pool underneath, which interesting enough, the pool originally hosted penguins. The next expansion would be a continuation of building out an African Veldt and American Plains lands, as well as building a trackless train transportation system that came in October 1st. The African area was completed in 1965 and had a wide variety of African animals. The park would be slowly transforming from a support area for the brewery to a full entertainment area. August Busch Jr. saw the challenge of Walt Disney World coming into the Orlando area and wanted the company to hold onto its market share. Their goal was to not lose any of the guests going to Tampa. Busch actually toured Walt Disney World to help him make decisions on the future of the park. They would expand the animal areas further, and by 1970 they would announce an even bigger expansion. They would add a train, log flume ride, and dark thrill ride. By the 1970s, we would see a complete transformation of the park into a theme park with a vast majority of roller coasters and rides. Python would officially be the park's first roller coaster, and it opened on July 1st, 1976. Throughout the 70s, there would be millions of dollars invested into Busch Gardens Tampa to enhance the tourism in the area and compete with Disney World. This was the first step in the direction of the Busch Company to take their theme park business seriously, which would lead them to the creation in the 1980s of the newly formed subsidiary called Busch Entertainment Corporation. Throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, Busch Gardens Tampa would go through several changes, adding more thrill and transforming into the park we know today. In the 1970s, the Busch brand would look to try to build around their breweries even more so. Believing in the success of their growing park in Tampa, they looked towards two different locations, Houston and Williamsburg. Houston would be a complete failure in the eyes of the Busch Gardens Company. The park opened in May 1971 and would be closed a few years later. The concept was once again for the park to support the adjacent Anheuser-Busch brewery that opened in 1966. The park had an Asian theme, with animals being from colder regions on display like penguins, polar bears, and sea lions. However, they did not have much success. Their next jump into the theme park industry would come with Williamsburg, Virginia. Busch, seeing the growth in the region, thought it would be a great opportunity for expansion. Knowing that they were able to have success in the high tourism area of Florida, they believed Virginia could be the next opportunity. Busch Gardens Williamsburg would take the pain points from Houston and Van Nuys, pairing it with the success of Busch Gardens Tampa. Busch Gardens Williamsburg would once again take on the concept of building a park to support the Anheuser-Busch brewery. The park would also be placed across from the Kingsmill Resort Complex, which would drive more attendance. This was a concept that Busch actually developed, as they believed a resort location would help guide more tourism to the area, especially being so close to the developments of Colonial Williamsburg. The area would contain things like the brewery, the park, upscale developments, and offices. The concept of the Williamsburg Park was supposed to be old Europe, taking the theme of the growing Colonial Williamsburg around it. The idea was you're visiting the old land, aka Europe, while over in the Colonial Williamsburg area you were getting the old America. The park would originally be called the Old Country to fit its theme, being renamed Busch Gardens Williamsburg in 1993. When the park opened on May 16, 1975, it consisted of England, Scotland, France, and Germany. The lands offered rides, attractions, and traditional foods you may see in those regions. In the 1970s, the park would have 4 roller coasters and would highly be focused on thrill rides and experiencing the country's cultures. The first season would be extremely successful in the region, with an expansion to be planned after 1975. The most exciting and looked forward to riding during the first few years of existence would be the Loch Ness roller coaster. The Busch Park in Williamsburg continued to grow throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. It has become more popular than ever before, becoming a leader in the Northeast region for parks. Rides like Apollo's Chariot, Verbolten, and the new Pantheon ride that released in 2022 have kept tourists coming over the years. They realized their strong niche market in Williamsburg, where they could mix a theme park with the Colonial Williamsburg area. The 2 main Busch Garden parks had great success, which created a new value for the Busch Company. Thanks for watching. This is part 1 of a 4-part series about the history of SeaWorld theme parks. Please come back next week to learn more about the SeaWorld history. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow. Believable truths?